What did Isaiah really see? Why did kings fear his words? How can one ancient scroll sound like tomorrow's headline? Most people know Isaiah in fragments, a verse at Christmas, a warning about judgment, a promise quoted in church. But the full story feels stranger and sharper than that. It begins in a year of political anxiety around the death of King Uzziah, when Judah stood between foreign empires and inner decay. Into that pressure walks a prophet who does not offer comfort first. He says, he saw the Lord enthroned, with the temple shaken and voices like fire. Whether you read this as vision, liturgy, or prophetic experience, the claim is the same. History is not random, and human power is not ultimate. But here's the thing. Isaiah is not only a book of doom, and it is not only a book of hope. It is a courtroom, a battlefield, and a future window all at once. My thesis is simple. The book of Isaiah reveals that divine holiness exposes corrupted nations, reshapes suffering into redemption, and pushes history toward a renewed creation. Our path is clear. We will enter Isaiah's throne room vision, trace the judgments against corrupt nations, examine the suffering servant prophecy, and end at the promise of new heavens and a new earth. As we move, stay cautious with easy timelines and neat labels, because scholars debate composition layers and historical sequencing in parts of Isaiah. Yet, even with those debates, the book's voice remains coherent in its moral pressure. It confronts rulers who build wealth on violence, judges who sell verdicts, priests who keep rituals while neglecting mercy. The language is ancient, but the pattern feels painfully modern. Then the tone shifts. In the servant passages, suffering is no longer just punishment, it becomes a mysterious instrument of healing. Interpretations differ across Jewish and Christian traditions, and we should say that plainly. Still, the text's emotional weight is hard to escape. Innocence wounded, guilt carried, peace purchased through affliction. Here, Isaiah moves from national crisis into the anatomy of human guilt and hope. And he does not stop at rescue from one empire or one generation. He imagines a final horizon where tears are answered, violence is restrained, and creation itself is made new. Not an escape from the world, but the renewal of it. Not denial, but restoration. If that sounds too lofty, remember Isaiah's burden was always practical. He called people to turn, to abandon polished injustice, to choose humility before collapse. This is where the pastoral edge enters for us. Holiness is not an ornament for the religious. It is a fire that tells the truth about us. Mercy is not weakness. It is the only road that does not end in ruin. So stay with me to the end, because Isaiah is not merely predicting events. He is diagnosing the heart, exposing false security, and opening a dangerous kind of hope. By the time we reach the final vision, the question will no longer be whether Isaiah was dramatic. The question will be whether we are willing to be changed by what he saw. If Isaiah is only an ancient artifact, why does his first vision still feel dangerous? If this is just religious poetry, why does it begin with collapse, fear, and a shaking sanctuary instead of private comfort? The text places us near the death of King Uzziah, around the 8th century BCE, a moment when Judah was politically exposed and spiritually divided. That historical setting matters, because Isaiah does not appear in a stable golden age. He appears when institutions are strained and old confidence is breaking. In that pressure, he describes seeing the Lord enthroned, high and lifted up, with the hem of the robe filling the temple, seraphim crying out, and thresholds trembling at the sound. You can hear this language in Isaiah 6, and even careful readers disagree on how to classify it. Is it a temple vision linked to liturgy? Is it a prophetic trance report? Is it a theological composition written to express a call experience? Different interpretations exist, and they do not erase the central force of the scene. Isaiah is saying that before he speaks to kings, he is first undone before holiness. Why does that detail matter for our main question? Because if Isaiah were mostly about politics, we would expect strategy first. Instead, the narrative starts with transcendence and moral exposure. The prophet cries that he is unclean among an unclean people, then receives a symbolic purification with a live coal from the altar. Whether read literally or symbolically, the movement is unmistakable. Revelation is not information transfer. Revelation is personal disruption that becomes public commission. Who sends him and to whom? The call line is stark. Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Isaiah volunteers, then receives a mission that sounds almost unbearable. He is told to speak to a people who will hear yet not understand, see yet not perceive, until cities lie waste. Many readers stumble here. Is God hardening people? Is this judicial language after persistent refusal? Is it prophetic irony announcing what resistance will produce? Interpretive debates continue, but the narrative outcome is clear. Isaiah is commissioned to truth-telling in a context where truth may intensify resistance before it heals. That tension protects us from shallow readings. The vision does not authorize religious ego. It dismantles ego. Isaiah's authority is born from confession, cleansing, and costly obedience, not from charisma, and this speaks directly to our thesis. Divine holiness is not decorative. It judges pretense, beginning with the messenger, then widening to the nation. If the prophet himself must pass through fire, what will happen to a society built on polished injustice? Listen to the contrast inside the call account. The throne room is filled with glory, yet the human response is dread. The voice invites, yet the assignment wounds. Judgment is announced, yet a remnant image appears in the end, like a holy seed in a cut-down stump. Doom and hope are braided from the beginning, not patched together later. That is why reading Isaiah as a random anthology misses the internal logic. The book trains us to hold severity and mercy in the same hand. Here's what most people miss. The throne room vision is not an isolated mystical prologue. It becomes the lens for everything that follows. Once holiness has been seen, foreign policy is no longer merely diplomacy. Economics is no longer merely growth. Worship is no longer merely ceremony. Every public system becomes morally visible. If power is not ultimate, then kings can be measured. If holiness is real, then national success can still be wrought. Can we verify every historical synchronization in Isaiah with modern precision? Not always. Debates over dating and compositional layers remain active, especially across material associated with different historical horizons. Yet even where scholarship argues over formation, the canonical voice is coherent in its pressure. Pride falls, exploitation is named, false trust is exposed, a faithful remainder is preserved, future renewal is promised. The vision of chapter 6 is like a tuning fork struck once, and the rest of the book vibrates in that frequency. So ask yourself a difficult question. If Isaiah's first encounter is true in substance, not necessarily in the way modern readers demand reportage, what happens to our assumptions about control? What happens to leaders who imagine they can weaponize religion while ignoring justice? What happens to believers who keep ritual language but silence repentance? The next movement answers with unsettling clarity, because the prophet now turns from the temple threshold to the public square, where entire nations stand trial. When Isaiah begins pronouncing judgment, he does not speak only to one enemy and spare everyone else. He names Judah and Jerusalem, but he also addresses surrounding powers and distant empires through a series often called the oracles against the nations. Why would a prophet from Judah speak over Moab, Damascus, Egypt, Babylon, Tyre, Assyria, and others? Because his claim is universal in scope. The Holy One governs history beyond local borders, and no throne is immune to moral accounting. This is where the documentary caution matters. We should not flatten every oracle into a single date-stamped event, because some material may reflect layered transmission and later framing. But the recurring pattern is still clear enough to follow. Arrogance rises, violence follows, exploitation hardens into policy, and eventually collapse arrives through war, internal decay, or both. Is that prediction, pattern recognition, covenant theology, or all three at once? The text invites careful readers to consider that these are not mutually exclusive. Take the famous taunt over the king of Babylon in Isaiah 14, where a figure who sought to ascend is brought down to Sheol. Later traditions connect this passage to cosmic rebellion themes, while many scholars read it first as political satire aimed at imperial hubris. We do not need to force one interpretation to see the warning. Exalting oneself as untouchable ends in humiliation. The imagery is dramatic because the moral claim is severe. Empires can feel eternal right before they fracture, or consider Isaiah's critique of alliances. During regional crises, leaders in Judah look toward Egypt for security against Assyria. Isaiah repeatedly questions that strategy, not because diplomacy is always evil, but because trust had become distorted. Military horses and foreign treaties were treated as saviors, while covenant fidelity and justice were neglected. Could his counsel sound impractical in the moment? Certainly. Prophetic speech often sounds unrealistic before events expose misplaced confidence. What does he target inside Judah itself? Land accumulation that crushes families. Courts corrupted by bribery. Leaders described as companions of thieves. Worship gatherings that continue while bloodshed stains the streets. The accusation is not that people stopped being religious. The accusation is that religion became a mask for moral refusal. That distinction is uncomfortable because it confronts every age, not only ancient Jerusalem. But here's the thing. Isaiah's judgments are not random anger bursts. They are covenant lawsuit language, charges framed against a people who already knew the terms of justice and mercy. That is why the rhetoric moves between legal, poetic, and apocalyptic tones. The prophet is prosecuting betrayal, not inventing arbitrary standards. Even the oracles against foreign nations imply that cruelty, arrogance, and predation are not culturally neutral. They are accountable before a standard beyond empire. Is there mercy in this section, or only fire? Look closely and you find both. Threads of restoration interrupt announcements of ruin. A remnant motif survives repeated devastation. Songs of trust appear beside warnings of woe. The logic is consistent with our thesis. Holiness judges injustice, but judgment is not the final word. Exposure is intended to make return possible. Still, return is costly. National myths must die. Leaders must be measured by righteousness, not spectacle. Communities must admit that polished liturgy cannot substitute for ethical repair. That is why Isaiah keeps sounding modern. The names of nations change, but patterns repeat. People still confuse wealth with innocence. Governments still baptize force as necessity. Religious people still assume performance can cancel exploitation. So where does the text turn when condemnation has done its work? Toward a mystery many readers recognize but few fully dwell in. If injustice is deep, and if judgment alone cannot recreate a people, then what kind of intervention remains? Isaiah's next movement introduces a servant whose suffering unsettles triumphal expectations and forces us to ask whether redemption can arrive through wounded obedience rather than visible dominance. Who is the servant in Isaiah's songs? Israel collectively, an idealized faithful remnant, a historical prophetic figure, a royal agent, or a messianic individual read through later traditions. All of those proposals have been argued with evidence and counter-evidence. Responsible reading should admit the complexity, yet the rhetorical force of the servant passages does not depend on erasing debate. The figure is marked by humility, mission, rejection, and vicarious burden. In Isaiah 42, the servant is called to bring justice gently, not by crushing the weak. In Isaiah 49, the mission extends beyond restoring Israel to becoming a light for nations. In Isaiah 50, the servant endures shame while remaining obedient. Then Isaiah 52 to 53 presents the most disputed and emotionally charged portrait. Despised, pierced, bearing griefs, making many accounted righteous. Interpretive communities diverge sharply here, and honesty requires naming that divergence. Jewish readings often situate the servant in relation to Israel's corporate vocation and suffering across history, while Christian readings identify a unique culmination in Jesus and read the passage Christologically. Some scholars emphasize exilic trauma and communal identity formation. Others highlight literary coherence around an individualizing profile. Rather than pretending this is simple, we can say what the text itself keeps pressing. Redemptive movement appears through apparent weakness. Innocence absorbs violence without mirroring it. Healing is imagined as flowing from affliction, not from domination. Does that mean suffering is automatically holy? No. Isaiah does not romanticize abuse or call evil good. The book repeatedly condemns oppressors and defends the vulnerable. The servant logic is not passive acceptance of cruelty. It is a claim that God can transform unjust suffering into an instrument of reconciliation and restoration. That claim is mysterious, and any teaching of it without compassion becomes dangerous. Notice how this answers the episode's central dilemma. If Isaiah were merely predicting geopolitics, servant songs would feel like a detour. Instead, they sit near the heart of the argument. Human rebellion is not solved only by toppling regimes. Something deeper must be healed. Guilt, alienation, and hardened desire require more than policy correction. The servant material introduces moral substitution, intercession, and renewed vocation as part of the cure. And what is the pastoral edge at medium intensity? Just this. Many people can admit society is broken while refusing to admit personal complicity. Isaiah will not allow that distance. The servant mirror asks whether we want justice only for enemies or also for ourselves. It asks whether mercy is weakness or the deepest form of strength. It asks whether transformation can begin where pride gives way. Even the language of silence and speech in these passages carries weight. The servant speaks with disciplined obedience, yet at key moments is portrayed as silent before humiliation. Is this powerlessness or chosen restraint under trust? The text leaves room for reverent struggle, but it keeps moving us away from fantasies of instant victory toward costly fidelity. If this movement ended at suffering, Isaiah would still be tragic, but it does not end there. The servant horizon opens into consolation, return, and cosmic renewal language that stretches beyond one political restoration. After judgment and through redemptive suffering, the book dares a final claim. History is not cycling endlessly toward decay. It is being drawn toward remaking. What does Isaiah mean by new heavens and a new earth? In Isaiah 65 and 66, we hear imagery of weeping answered, long life, secure labor, reconciled creation, and worship reordered under God's reign. Are these images literal geography, symbolic covenant renewal, eschatological vision, or a layered blend? Interpreters disagree, and humility is appropriate. Yet the direction is unmistakable. The endpoint is not annihilation for its own sake. It is transformed life wherein justice no longer defines the normal. That matters for viewers who assume biblical prophecy is mostly escape language. Isaiah's closing vision is not escapism in its basic movement, it is renovation. Houses are built and inhabited, vineyards are planted and enjoyed. Predatory violence is restrained in poetic terms, even the wolf and lamb image signaling altered order. This is creation healed, not creation discarded. Can we map this directly onto modern timelines with confidence? Caution is wise. Apocalyptic speculation often outruns the text. Isaiah gives moral orientation more than date charts. He insists that present conduct and future hope belong together. You cannot credibly long for a renewed world while practicing the old world's injustices. This is where the whole book closes the loop with chapter 6. The holiness that shook the temple now reshapes the horizon of history. The courtroom against nations was never the final room. Beyond the verdict stands a restored city, purified worship, and a community marked by humility rather than spectacle. Doom and hope were never rivals. They were stages in one redemptive argument. How does this answer the fear that Isaiah is only dramatic rhetoric from a distant age? Because the structure keeps confronting us now. First, false security is exposed. Second, injustice is named and judged. Suffering is transformed into a redemptive possibility. Fourth, renewal is promised as the telos of divine purpose, that is, coherent theology, not random fragments. And it is existential, not merely academic. Where do we locate ourselves inside that arc? Not at a safe observational distance. We are implicated in the same temptations, trusting power, normalizing exploitation, performing religion without repentance, demanding hope without surrender. Isaiah calls these patterns out with unnerving precision. He also refuses despair by insisting that judgment can serve mercy when it leads to turning. If you listen carefully, the book is not asking whether we can decode every symbol with certainty. It is asking whether we will let holiness reorder what we call normal. Will we keep polishing systems that injure people while singing sacred songs over them? Or will we accept the painful grace of exposure so that restoration becomes more than a word? A final caution keeps us honest. Claims about exact authorship divisions, editorial stages, and historical reference in every unit of Isaiah remain debated, and some reconstructions are provisional. Serious study should welcome that complexity. Yet complexity is not an excuse for evasion. The canonical message still lands with force. Pride collapses, injustice is judged, mercy makes a way, and creation is destined for renewal. So the episode thesis stands. Isaiah is not a split personality of threat on one page and comfort on the next. It is a unified prophetic witness in which divine holiness exposes corrupted nations, redemptive suffering opens a path for healing, and history is aimed at restoration. That means the book is not merely about what happened then, it is about what must happen in us now. And now we arrive at the edge of decision. If the vision is true, no empire is ultimate. If the judgments are true, no injustice is invisible. If the servant pattern is true, mercy is stronger than domination. If the final horizon is true, renewal is not naive optimism, but promised direction. The unresolved question is not whether Isaiah is intense. The unresolved question is whether we are willing to be remade by what he reveals. Because once that question is asked, one final movement remains, and it is the most personal one of all. Not what Isaiah meant to ancient kings, but what his fire, his warnings, and his hope demand from us today. So where have we arrived? We began with a question that sounded historical, but ended up deeply personal. Is Isaiah only a dramatic record from an unstable ancient world, or is it a living revelation that still exposes power, suffering, and hope in our own time? After walking through the throne room, the courtroom of nations, the servant songs, and the promise of renewed creation, one conclusion stands with unusual clarity. Isaiah is not a pile of disconnected moods. It is a coherent prophetic vision, where holiness judges what we normalize, mercy enters what we cannot heal alone, and history bends toward restoration rather than permanent ruin. First, the throne room vision reframes authority. Isaiah does not start with policy, enemies, or strategy. He starts with holiness, with a reality that makes every human structure answerable. That opening matters because it prevents us from domesticating the book into political commentary only. Kings, priests, economies, and armies are all placed under a higher measure. We noted uncertainties in historical sequencing and compositional layering across parts of Isaiah, but those debates do not erase the text's sustained claim that human power is never ultimate. Second, judgment in Isaiah is moral exposure, not theatrical rage. The oracles against Judah and the nations reveal recurring patterns that still feel familiar: public religion without justice, leadership without integrity, wealth without mercy, security built on denial. Isaiah's warning is severe precisely because it is ethical. He is not fascinated with collapse for its own sake. He is naming what collapses people from within. And this is why the thesis holds. The book does not swing randomly between darkness and comfort. Its judgments clear the ground for return. Third, the servant prophecy places redemption where we least expect it. Instead of glorifying domination, Isaiah imagines healing emerging through wounded obedience, patient endurance, and burden-bearing love. Interpretations differ across traditions regarding the servant's identity and referent, and we should keep that honesty. But even with that tension, the passage forces a confrontation. If guilt is deep, then rescue cannot be shallow. If violence has shaped a human story, then restoration must reach deeper than revenge. Then the final horizon opens. New heavens and new earth are presented not as sentimental escape, but as transformed life where grief, fear, and predation lose their throne. Whether one reads these scenes as fully future, symbolically theological, or layered in fulfillment, the trajectory is the same. Isaiah does not end in ash. He ends in renewal. That ending retroactively clarifies everything before it. Judgment was never the destination. It was the fire that made restoration truthful. So what do we do with this? We resist two easy mistakes. One is reducing Isaiah to end-time speculation detached from character. The other is reducing it to ancient literature detached from demand. Isaiah refuses both. It asks for moral response now, humility now, repaired justice now, faithful trust now. Not panic, not performance, not religious theater. Turning. And there is a gentle pastoral edge we should not skip. Holiness is not given to crush the honest. It is given to expose illusions and call us back to what is real. Mercy is not permission to stay unchanged. It is the door to become new. If Isaiah feels intense, maybe it is because false peace has become normal, and true peace always sounds disruptive at first. Before we close, one more word of caution. Some historical details tied to specific kings, redaction stages, and near-far fulfillments remain debated in scholarship. We honor that complexity. But complexity should mature our reading, not paralyze it. The main arc remains readable and urgent. Pride falls. Injustice is judged. Suffering can be redemptive. Creation is destined for renewal. If that arc is true, then Isaiah is not mainly asking whether we can decode every symbol. Isaiah is asking whether we will keep trusting what is already failing, or submit to the kind of truth that first wounds and then heals. That is the real dilemma under every chapter. If this journey sharpened your view, stay with the series for what comes next. Because after Isaiah, another ancient voice steps forward with dreams, beasts, and empires, and the next question may be even darker. When power demands worship, who is still free enough to refuse? Take a second, and based on what we uncovered today, answer this in the comments. Do you think you will resist Isaiah's warning, or let it change you? And as always, God bless you.